The Roman Empire, once invincible, has become an old man clinging to the remains of its greatness. Provinces fall away one by one, and the legions have lost their old strength. Yet Romans still call everyone around them barbarians, still believe civilization will protect them better than any wall. They are wrong. Something is coming from the east that Rome has not seen since Hannibal. From the 370s, a wave of horsemen poured out of the steppes of Central Asia, the Huns. The word alone inspired superstitious dread. Men who were born in the saddle, warriors who could fire a composite bow at full gallop with an accuracy no foot archer could match. The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus described them as barely human, chewing raw meat they had softened between their thighs and their horses' backs. Ahead of the Huns rolled a wave of refugees, Goths, Alans, Vandals. In 378, this culminated in catastrophe at Adrianople, where Emperor Valens himself died in battle. And here lay the paradox. Rome wasn't crushed by the Huns. It was crushed by the Goths, who were themselves fleeing the Huns. The shadow of the steppe riders was reshaping the world before they ever set foot on a battlefield. For decades, the Huns remained a fractured force, mercenaries for one side or the other, fighting each other as often as their neighbors. The empire needed a ruler, someone who could turn chaos into order, raw savagery into cold instrument. In the 430s, that man rose to power, a man who would force both Romes, east and west, to pay him tribute. A man Christian preachers would come to call the Scourge of God, genuinely believing the Lord had sent him to punish humanity for its sins. Attila. His story is an anatomy of how empires are born in blood, how one man can subjugate dozens of peoples, how civilizations that seemed eternal can collapse. His life is a journey from hostage to master of half of Europe. His death remains one of history's strangest mysteries. Prince of the Blood. Attila was born in the first decade of the 5th century, into a family that had ruled the Hunnic tribes for generations. He was not raised to command a horde. He was raised to rule a continent, taught diplomacy, the psychology of power, the Gothic language and Latin, the workings of Roman politics and its weak points. From childhood, by a strange twist of fate, the future Roman general Flavius Aetius was also a hostage in his youth, first among the Visigoths, then among the Huns, and there learned the same tactics of lightning cavalry raids. Attila and Aetius were never childhood friends, but they grew up in the same brutal school of real politics. One learned to turn Hunnic fury to Rome's service, the other to turn Roman gold to the service of his own power. Years later, the two would meet on a battlefield as equals. Historians still argue over where the Huns came from and what Attila's name even meant. Some see a Turkic people, others Proto-Mongols, still others a mixed steppe origin. There is no certain answer, but every theory agrees on one point. Attila's ancestors came from a land where winter lasts 9 months, and only the strongest survive. In 434, the Hun supreme chieftain, Rua, died. Power passed to his two nephews, Attila and Bleda. Attila showed at once that the rules had changed. He received Roman envoys not in a palace, but in the open steppe, forcing them to negotiate on horseback, a humiliation worse than any defeat. Emperor Theodosius II agreed to double the annual tribute to 700 Roman pounds of gold just to buy peace. And in 437, Hunnic mercenaries hired by Rome annihilated 20,000 Burgundian warriors and wiped an entire kingdom off the map, a massacre so brutal it would later become the seed of the Nibelungen Lied. Fratricide. Attila and Bleda were opposites. Bleda wanted to be loved by his people. Attila wanted to be feared from Britain to Persia. For 10 years, Attila patiently won over key commanders to his side, waiting for the moment his brother's guard would finally drop. 444 proved fatal. Roman chroniclers recorded tersely that Attila killed Bleda, his brother and co-ruler. Another historian, Jordanes, adds a telling word: treacherously. This was not a fair duel. It was murder. What is astonishing is that no one avenged him. The army instantly accepted Attila's sole rule. In the world of the Huns, strength was the only argument for legitimacy. The horde now had a single head, and that head turned at once toward the riches of the Eastern Roman Empire. The Balkans in flames. In 441, while the Eastern Empire fought on other fronts, Attila struck the undefended Danube frontier. Belgrade and Viminacium fell, followed by Naissus, a city taken with the help of captured engineers who built siege towers and battering rams. After the storm, the city was wiped from the map. A traveler passing through years later wrote that Naissus still stood empty, its riverbanks littered with bones. The climax came in 447, as if nature itself had turned against Rome. A massive earthquake struck Constantinople that January, collapsing sections of the famed Theodosian walls, once thought impregnable. From the north, Attila advanced methodically through the ruined Balkans. Historians count over 100 captured towns in Thrace alone. A Roman army tried to stop him on the river Utus and was nearly wiped out. The road to Constantinople lay open. Attila never took the capital. Perhaps plague in his own camp. Perhaps hastily rebuilt walls. Or perhaps he simply judged a living cash cow more valuable than a dead city. The peace of 448 forced Byzantium to pay nearly 2 tons of gold at once, with the annual tribute swelling to over 650 kilograms, a sum so ruinous that fathers reportedly sold their own children into slavery, and some, unable to bear the shame, took their own lives. In the lion's den. In 448, a Byzantine embassy led by the historian Priscus of Panium traveled to Attila's camp in Pannonia, leaving the only detailed eyewitness account of the Hunnic ruler. A short, dark-skinned man with small eyes, proud in his gait, radiating, in Priscus's words, the charisma of pure power. At the feast, the contrast was striking. Guests dressed in silk and gold, while Attila himself ate plain meat from a wooden plate, drank water, and wore clothing without a single thread of gold. A deliberate statement that the source of power was in himself, not an ornament. The only crack in his icy mask came when his youngest son, Ernak, entered the hall. Attila's face softened with a tenderness the guests had never seen. Priscus later learned a secret whispered among the Huns. Seers had prophesied that Attila's line would fall after his death, but would be restored through this very boy. That same visit uncovered a plot. A Byzantine eunuch had bribed one of Attila's own commanders to assassinate him. Attila learned of it in advance, extracted a ransom from the would-be killer, and sent the emperor a mocking letter, humiliating Constantinople without striking a single blow. The Ring and the Fury. In Ravenna lived Honoria, sister of the Western Emperor Valentinian III, kept locked away and forbidden to marry, lest a husband claim the throne through her. After a scandalous affair with her estate's steward, she was forcibly betrothed to a dull elderly senator. In desperation, Honoria sent Attila a letter with her own ring, begging for protection from her brother's tyranny. Attila turned the ring over in his fingers and smiled. He declared it a marriage proposal and demanded half the Western Empire as her dowry. Valentinian was furious and nearly had his sister executed. Only their mother's pleas saved her. Rome refused, but Attila no longer cared what Honoria had actually meant. He had his pretext. Now he marched west not as a conqueror, but as an insulted bridegroom, claiming what was rightfully his. Gaul in flames. In the spring of 451, a vast multi-ethnic army crossed the Rhine. Huns, Ostrogoths, Gepids, and dozens of other peoples, numbering by most estimates somewhere between 80,000 and 150,000. Trier, Cologne, and Reims fell one after another. Metz was put to the sword and burned to the ground. Legend says Paris was spared only by the resolve of a young nun, Genevieve, who convinced the citizens not to flee. Attila's true target was Orléans, the key crossroads of Gaul. As the siege reached its climax and the gates began to give way, dust rose on the horizon. The army of Aetius, the very Roman general who had once ridden the steppes among the Huns as a boy. He achieved the impossible. He convinced the Visigoths to set aside their old hatred of Rome and unite against the common enemy. Attila lifted the siege and withdrew to the plains near modern-day Troyes, the Catalonian fields. He accepted the challenge. The Battle of the Nations. Late June 451. One of the largest battles of late antiquity. Romans, Visigoths, Franks, and Burgundians against Huns, Ostrogoths, Gepids, and their allies. The Gothic historian Jordanes, writing a century later, put the death toll at 165,000. Modern historians consider that wildly exaggerated, estimating somewhere between 15,000 and 30,000. Even so, it meant rivers of blood. The dead were piled and burned, and black smoke hung over the field for a month. Empire fought empire. Germans killed Germans. Steppe warriors shot at steppe warriors, as Ostrogoths fought on Attila's side against their own Visigothic kin. The key to victory was a hill overlooking the plain. In a desperate struggle for the high ground, the Visigothic king Theodoric was killed, trampled in the crush. His son Thorismund raised his father's bloodied sword and led a furious countercharge that broke the Huns. By evening, Attila had been pushed back to his fortified camp. According to legend, he ordered saddles and tent poles piled into a great pyre, prepared to burn himself alive rather than be taken alive. But the final assault never came. Aetius, wary that annihilating the Huns entirely would leave the Visigoths too powerful, persuaded Thorismund to return home and secure his crown instead. Attila survived, wounded but alive. For Europe, it was the first proof that he could be stopped. The Italian storm. The very next summer, in 452, Attila invaded northern Italy. "If you will not give me Honoria and my dowry, I will take them myself," he declared. First in his path stood Aquileia, the pearl of the Adriatic, the second Rome. The siege dragged on for 3 months. The garrison fought fiercely, and Attila's own commanders began to grumble. But the city fell, and what followed was genocide. The men slaughtered, the city razed. The catastrophe had an unexpected consequence. Survivors fled to the coastal lagoons and built huts on stilts among the reeds, beyond the reach of cavalry. Those huts became houses, the houses became districts, and the districts became a city on water. Venice was born out of terror of Attila. He pressed on south through the Po Valley. Verona and Brescia fell. Milan opened its gates without a fight. In the imperial palace, Attila found a fresco showing a Roman emperor trampling defeated barbarians and ordered it repainted so that emperors now knelt before him, offering sacks of gold. The road to Rome lay open. The emperor was already packing to flee to Africa. Nothing, it seemed, could stop Attila. The Pope and the retreat. On the banks of the river Mincio came one of history's most famous encounters. To meet Attila walked an old man with no army, no weapon, only a cross in his hands. Pope Leo I. What was said between them remains a mystery, but the result is known. After hours of conversation, Attila ordered his army to withdraw, turning back to Pannonia without ever reaching Rome. Church chronicles describe a miracle, the apostles Peter and Paul appearing with drawn swords, visible only to Attila. In truth, it was likely a combination of factors: plague ravaging the Hunnic camp, brutal summer heat and starving horses, and a Byzantine strike against the Huns' undefended homeland, while Attila's army was away. Legend also says the Pope reminded him of the fate of Alaric the Visigoth, who had sacked Rome half a century earlier and died shortly after. Attila, a superstitious man who believed in omens, weighed his options: risk everything for a city that was no longer the empire's true center, or withdraw, take a handsome ransom, and return the following year with fresh strength. He chose retreat, not defeat, calculation. And as he left, he promised Roman envoys he would come back and take everything. The last night. He never returned. In the spring of 453, celebrating another wedding, this time to a young woman named Ildiko, Attila, normally restrained and austere, drank and laughed more than anyone had ever seen. The feast stretched deep into the night. By morning, no sound came from the tent. His commanders, knowing he always rose before dawn, finally broke down the door. Attila lay dead, without a single wound, his bed soaked in blood from a nosebleed he had apparently choked on in his sleep, having passed out drunk on his back. Ildiko sat in the corner, veiled, weeping. She had not fled, which itself undercuts later rumors of murder. The master of half of Europe, survivor of 100 battles, was killed by a drunken wedding night. His funeral became a terrifying ritual. His body was placed in 3 coffins, iron, silver, and gold, symbolizing the peoples he conquered, the wealth he amassed, and the power he held over the world. The grave was dug in a riverbed temporarily diverted for the purpose. Then the water was let back over it. Everyone who took part in the burial was killed on the spot, so the secret would die with them. Attila's grave has never been found. Collapse and legacy. The Hunnic Empire had rested entirely on Attila's personal power, and it collapsed almost as soon as he died. His many sons tore each other apart for the throne, and by 454 rebellious Germanic tribes crushed the Huns at the Battle of Nidau. His eldest son died in battle. His second was ambushed and killed, his severed head put on display at the Hippodrome in Constantinople. Only the youngest, Ernak, the very boy of the prophecy, survived, leading the remnants of his people into the steppes of the Black Sea, where the Hunnic name faded from history within 2 generations. But Attila himself never disappeared. He became a myth. The church remembered him as an instrument of divine wrath, portraying him in medieval chronicles as little short of a demon. Germanic epic, by contrast, softened him into the wise and generous King Etzel of the Nibelungenlied. In Hungary, he is honored as a national hero and ancestor of kings. Among Turkic peoples, he is remembered as a great Kagan who united the steppe and brought the West to its knees. Attila showed Europe just how fragile an order that seemed eternal really was. He was a barbarian who made Romans look savage. He was a tyrant who reshaped the map of the world. And the scars of his blows are still visible across the continent, a millennium and a half after he choked on his own blood on the last night of his life. Thank you for watching.